Chapter 120. Homeward. Mr. Callenbach had accompanied me to England with a view to going to India. We were staying together and of course wanted to sail by the same boat. Germans, however, were under such strict surveillance that we had our doubts about Mr. Callenbach getting a passport. I did my best to get it, and Mr. Roberts, who was in favor of his getting his passport, sent a cable to the Viceroy in this behalf. But straight came Lord Hardinge's reply, "Regret Government of India not prepared to take any such risk." All of us understood the force of the reply. It was a great wrench for me to part from Mr. Callenbach, but I could see that his pang was greater. Could he have come to India, he would have been leading today the simple happy life of a farmer and weaver. Now he is in South Africa, leading his old life and doing brisk business as an architect. We wanted a third-class passage, but as there was none available on P&O boats, we had to go second. We took with us the dried fruit we had carried from South Africa, as most of it would not be procurable on the boat, where fresh fruit was easily available. Dr. Jivraj Mehta had bandaged my ribs with Mead's plaster and had asked me not to remove it till we reached the Red Sea. For 2 days I put up with the discomfort, but finally it became too much for me. It was with considerable difficulty that I managed to undo the plaster and regain the liberty of having a proper wash and bath. My diet consisted mostly of nuts and fruits. I found that I was improving every day and felt very much better by the time we entered the Suez Canal. I was weak, but felt entirely out of danger. And I gradually went on increasing my exercise. The improvement I attributed largely to the pure air of the temperate zone. Whether it was due to past experience or to any other reason, I do not know, but the kind of distance I noticed between the English and Indian passengers on the boat was something I had not observed even on my voyage from South Africa. I did talk to a few Englishmen, but the talk was mostly formal. There were hardly any cordial conversations such as had certainly taken place on the South African boats. The reason for this was, I think, to be found in the conscious or unconscious feeling at the back of the Englishman's mind that he belonged to the ruling race, and the feeling at the back of the Indian's mind that he belonged to the subject race. I was eager to reach home and get free from this atmosphere. On arriving at Aden we already began to feel somewhat at home. We knew the Adenwalas very well, having met Mr. Kikabad Kavashi Dinshaw in Durban and come in close contact with him and his wife. A few days more and we reached Bombay. It was such a joy to get back to the homeland after an exile of 10 years. Gokhale had inspired a reception for me in Bombay, where he had come in spite of his delicate health. I had approached India in the ardent hope of merging myself in him, and thereby feeling free. But fate had willed it otherwise. Chapter 121. Some reminiscences of the bar. Before coming to a narrative of the course my life took in India, it seems necessary to recall a few of the South African experiences which I have deliberately left out. Some lawyer friends have asked me to give my reminiscences of the bar. The number of these is so large that, if I were to describe them all, they would occupy a volume by themselves and take me out of my scope. But it may not perhaps be improper to recall some of those which bear upon the practice of truth. So far as I can recollect, I have already said that I never resorted to untruth in my profession, and that a large part of my legal practice was in the interest of public work, for which I charged nothing beyond out-of-pocket expenses, and these too I sometimes met myself. I had thought that in saying this I had said all that was necessary as regards my legal practice. But friends want me to do more. They seem to think that, if I described however slightly, some of the occasions when I refused to swerve from the truth, the legal profession might profit by it. As a student I had heard that the lawyer's profession was a liar's profession. But this did not influence me, as I had no intention of earning either position or money by lying. My principle was put to the test many a time in South Africa. Often I knew that my opponents had tutored their witnesses, and if I only encouraged my client or his witnesses to lie, we could win the case. But I always resisted the temptation. I remember only one occasion when, after having won a case, I suspected that my client had deceived me. In my heart of hearts I always wished that I should win only if my client's case was right. In fixing my fees I do not recall ever having made them conditional on my winning the case. Whether my client won or lost, I expected nothing more nor less than my fees. I warned every new client at the outset that he should not expect me to take up a false case or to coach the witnesses, with the result that I built up such a reputation that no false cases used to come to me. Indeed, some of my clients would keep their clean cases for me, and take the doubtful ones elsewhere. There was one case which proved a severe trial. It was brought to me by one of my best clients. It was a case of highly complicated accounts and had been a prolonged one. It had been heard in parts before several courts. Ultimately, the bookkeeping portion of it was entrusted by the court to the arbitration of some qualified accountants. The award was entirely in favor of my client, but the arbitrators had inadvertently committed an error in calculation which, however small, was serious, inasmuch as an entry which ought to have been on the debit side was made on the credit side. The opponents had opposed the award on other grounds. I was junior counsel for my client. When the senior counsel became aware of the error, he was of opinion that our client was not bound to admit it. He was clearly of opinion that no counsel was bound to admit anything that went against his client's interest. I said we ought to admit the error. But the senior counsel contended, in that case there is every likelihood of the court canceling the whole award, and no sane counsel would imperil his client's case to that extent. At any rate, I would be the last man to take any such risk. If the case were to be sent up for a fresh hearing, one could never tell what expenses our client might have to incur, and what the ultimate result might be. The client was present when this conversation took place. I said, I feel that both our client and we ought to run the risk. Where is the certainty of the court upholding a wrong award simply because we do not admit the error? And supposing the admission were to bring the client to grief, what harm is there? But why should we make the admission at all, said the senior counsel. Where is the surety of the court not detecting the error or our opponent not discovering it, said I. Well then, will you argue the case? I am not prepared to argue it on your terms, replied the senior counsel with decision. I humbly answered, if you will not argue, then I am prepared to do so, if our client so desires. I shall have nothing to do with the case if the error is not admitted. With this I looked at my client. He was a little embarrassed. I had been in the case from the very first. The client fully trusted me, and knew me through and through. He said, well, then, you will argue the case and admit the error. Let us lose, if that is to be our lot. God defend the right. I was delighted. I had expected nothing less from him. The senior counsel again warned me, pitied me for my obduracy, but congratulated me all the same. What happened in the court we shall see in the next chapter. Chapter 122. Sharp practice? I had no doubt about the soundness of my advice, but I doubted very much my fitness for doing full justice to the case. I felt it would be a most hazardous undertaking to argue such a difficult case before the Supreme Court, and I appeared before the bench in fear and trembling. As soon as I referred to the error in the accounts, one of the judges said, is not this sharp practice, Mr. Gandhi? I boiled within to hear this charge. It was intolerable to be accused of sharp practice when there was not the slightest warrant for it. With a judge prejudiced from the start like this, there is little chance of success in this difficult case, I said to myself. But I composed my thoughts and answered, I am surprised that your lordship should suspect sharp practice without hearing me out. No question of a charge, said the judge. It is a mere suggestion. The suggestion here seems to me to amount to a charge. I would ask your lordship to hear me out and then arraign me if there is any occasion for it. I am sorry to have interrupted you, replied the judge. Pray do go on with your explanation of the discrepancy. I had enough material in support of my explanation. Thanks to the judge having raised this question, I was able to rivet the court's attention on my argument from the very start. I felt much encouraged and took the opportunity of entering into a detailed explanation. The court gave me a patient hearing, and I was able to convince the judges that the discrepancy was due entirely to inadvertence. They therefore did not feel disposed to cancel the whole award, which had involved considerable labor. The opposing counsel seemed to feel secure in the belief that not much argument would be needed after the error had been admitted. But the judges continued to interrupt him, as they were convinced that the error was a slip which could be easily rectified. The counsel labored hard to attack the award, but the judge who had originally started with the suspicion had now come round definitely to my side. Supposing Mr. Gandhi had not admitted the error, what would you have done? He asked. It was impossible for us to secure the services of a more competent and honest expert accountant than the one appointed by us. The court must presume that you know your case best. If you cannot point out anything beyond the slip which any expert accountant is liable to commit, the court will be loath to compel the parties to go in for fresh litigation and fresh expenses because of a patent mistake. We may not order a fresh hearing when such an error can be easily corrected, continued the judge. And so the counsel's objection was overruled. The court either confirmed the award, with the error rectified, or ordered the arbitrator to rectify the error, I forget which. I was delighted. So were my client and senior counsel, and I was confirmed in my conviction that It was not impossible to practice law without compromising truth. Let the reader, however, remember that even truthfulness in the practice of the profession cannot cure it of the fundamental defect that vitiates it. Chapter 123. Clients turned co-workers. The distinction between the legal practice in Natal and that in the Transvaal was that in Natal, there was a joint bar. A barrister, whilst he was admitted to the rank of advocate, could also practice as an attorney, whereas in the Transvaal, as in Bombay, the spheres of attorneys and advocates were distinct. A barrister had the right of election whether he would practice as an advocate or as an attorney. So whilst in Natal I was admitted as an advocate, in the Transvaal I sought admission as an attorney. For as an advocate I could not have come in direct contact with the Indians, and the white attorneys in South Africa would not have briefed me. But even in the Transvaal it was open to attorneys to appear before magistrates. On one occasion, whilst I was conducting a case before a magistrate in Johannesburg, I discovered that my client had deceived me. I saw him completely break down in the witness box. So without any argument I asked the magistrate to dismiss the case. The opposing counsel was astonished, and the magistrate was pleased. I rebuked my client for bringing a false case to me. He knew that I never accepted false cases, and when I brought the thing home to him, he admitted his mistake. And I have an impression that he was not angry with me for having asked the magistrate to decide against him. At any rate, my conduct in this case did not affect my practice for the worse. Indeed, it made my work easier. I also saw that my devotion to truth enhanced my reputation amongst the members of the profession, and in spite of the handicap of color I was able in some cases to win even their affection. During my professional work it was also my habit never to conceal my ignorance from my clients or my colleagues. Wherever I felt myself at sea, I would advise my client to consult some other counsel, or if he preferred to stick to me, I would ask him to let me seek the assistance of senior counsel. This frankness earned me the unbounded affection and trust of my clients. They were always willing to pay the fee whenever consultation with senior counsel was necessary. This affection and trust served me in good stead in my public work. I have indicated in the foregoing chapters that my object in practicing in South Africa was service of the community. Even for this purpose, winning the confidence of the people was an indispensable condition. The large-hearted Indian magnified into service professional work done for money, and when I advised them to suffer the hardships of imprisonment for the sake of their rights, many of them cheerfully accepted the advice, not so much because they had reasoned out the correctness of the course, as because of their confidence in, and affection for, me. As I write this, many a sweet reminiscence comes to my mind. Hundreds of clients became friends and real co-workers in public service, and their association sweetened the life that was otherwise full of difficulties and dangers. Chapter 124. How a Client Was Saved. The reader, by now, will be quite familiar with Parsi Rustamji's name. He was one who became at once my client and co-worker, or perhaps it would be truer to say that he first became co-worker and then client. I won his confidence to such an extent that he sought and followed my advice also in private domestic matters. Even when he was ill, he would seek my aid, and though there was much difference between our ways of living, he did not hesitate to accept my quack treatment. This friend once got into a very bad scrape. Though he kept me informed of most of his affairs, he had studiously kept back one thing. He was a large importer of goods from Bombay and Calcutta, and not infrequently he resorted to smuggling. But as he was on the best terms with customs officials, no one was inclined to suspect him. In charging duty, they used to take his invoices on trust. Some might even have connived at the smuggling. But to use the telling simile of the Gujarati poet Akko, theft like quicksilver won't be suppressed. And Parsi Rustamji's proved no exception. The good friend ran post-haste to me, the tears rolling down his cheeks as he said, "Bhai, I have deceived you. My guilt has been discovered today. I have smuggled and I am doomed. I must go to jail and be ruined. You alone may be able to save me from this predicament. I have kept back nothing else from you, but I thought I ought not to bother you with such tricks of the trade, and so I never told you about this smuggling. But now, how much I repent it." I calmed him and said, "To save or not to save you is in his hands. As to me, you know my way. I can but try to save you by means of confession." The good Parsi felt deeply mortified. "But is not my confession before you enough?" he asked. "You have wronged not me but government. How will the confession made before me avail you?" I replied gently, "Of course I will do just as you advise, but will you not consult with my old counsel, Mr. He is a friend too," said Parsi Rustamji. Inquiry revealed that the smuggling had been going on for a long time, but the actual offense detected involved a trifling sum. We went to his counsel. He perused the papers, and said, the case will be tried by a jury, and a natal jury will be the last to acquit an Indian. But I will not give up hope. I did not know this counsel intimately. Parsi Rustomji intercepted, I thank you, but I should like to be guided by Mr. Gandhi's advice in this case. He knows me intimately. Of course you will advise him whenever necessary. Having thus shelved the counsel's question, we went to Parsi Rustomji's shop. And now explaining my view, I said to him, I don't think this case should be taken to court at all. It rests with the customs officer to prosecute you or to let you go, and he in turn will have to be guided by the Attorney General. I am prepared to meet both. I propose that you should offer to pay the penalty that fix, and the odds are that they will be agreeable. But if they are not, you must be prepared to go to jail. I am of opinion that the shame lies not so much in going to jail as in committing the offense. The deed of shame has already been done. Imprisonment you should regard as a penance. The real penance lies in resolving never to smuggle again. I cannot say that Parsi Rustomji took all this quite well. He was a brave man, but his courage failed him for the moment. His name and fame were at stake, and where would he be if the edifice he had reared with such care and labor should go to pieces? Well, I have told you, he said, that I am entirely in your hands. You may do just as you like. I brought to bear on this case all my powers of persuasion. I met the customs officer and fearlessly apprised him of the whole affair. I also promised to place all the books at his disposal, and told him how penitent Parsi Rustomji was feeling. The customs officer said, I like the old Parsi. I am sorry he has made a fool of himself. You know where my duty lies. I must be guided by the Attorney General, and so I would advise you to use all your persuasion with him. I shall be thankful, said I, if you do not insist on dragging him into court. Having got him to promise this, I entered into correspondence with the Attorney General and also met him. I am glad to say that he appreciated my complete frankness and was convinced that I had kept back nothing. I now forget whether it was in connection with this or with some other case that my persistence and frankness extorted from him the remark, I see you will never take a no for an answer. The case against Parsi Rustomji was compromised that he was to pay a penalty equal to twice the amount he had confessed to having smuggled. Rustomji reduced to writing the facts of the whole case, got the paper framed and hung it up in his office to serve as a perpetual reminder to his heirs and fellow merchants. These friends Rustomji warned me not to be taken in by this transitory contrition. When I told Rustomji about this warning, he said, what would be my fate if I deceived you? Chapter 125. The First Experience. Before I reached home, the party which had started from Phoenix had already arrived. According to our original plan, I was to have preceded them, but my preoccupation in England with the war had upset all our calculations, and when I saw that I had to be detained in England indefinitely, I was faced with the question of finding them all to stay together. The Phoenix party. I wanted them all to stay together in India, if possible, and to live the life they had led at Phoenix. I did not know of any ashram to which I could recommend them to go, and therefore cabled to them to meet Mr. Andrews and do as he advised. So they were first put in the Gurukul, Kangri, where the late Swami Shraddhananji treated them as his own children. After this they were put in the Shantiniketan ashram, where the poet and his people showered similar love upon them. The experiences they gathered at both these places too stood them and me in good stead. The poet, Shraddhananji, and Principal Sushil Rudra, as I used to say to Andrews, composed his Trinity. When in South Africa he was never tired of speaking of them, and of my many sweet memories of South Africa. Mr. Andrews talks, day in and day out, of this great Trinity, are amongst the sweetest and most vivid. Mr. Andrews naturally put the Phoenix party in touch also with Sushil Rudra. Principal Rudra had no ashram, but he had a home which he placed completely at the disposal of the Phoenix family. Within a day of their arrival, his people made them deal so thoroughly at home that they did not seem to miss Phoenix at all. It was only when I landed in Bombay that I learnt that the Phoenix party was at Shantiniketan. I was therefore impatient to meet them as soon as I could after my meeting with Gokhale. The receptions in Bombay gave me an occasion for offering what might be called a little satyagraha. At the party given in my honor at Mr. Jangir Petit's place, I did not dare to speak in Gujarati. In those palatial surroundings of dazzling splendor, I, who had lived my best life among indentured laborers, felt myself a complete rustic. With my Kathiawadi cloak, turban and dhoti, I looked somewhat more civilized than I do today, but the pomp and splendor of Mr. Petit's mansion made me feel absolutely out of my element. However, I acquitted myself tolerably well, having taken shelter under Sir Farazesh's protecting wing. Then there was the Gujarati function. The Gujaratis would not let me go without a reception, which was organized by the late Atamlal Trivedi. I had acquainted myself with the program beforehand. Mr. Jinnah was present, being a Gujarati, I forget whether as president or as the principal speaker. He made a short and sweet little speech in English. As far as I remember, most of the other speeches were also in English. When my turn came, I expressed my thanks in Gujarati, explaining my partiality for Gujarati and Hindustani, and entering my humble protest against the use of English in a Gujarati gathering. This I did, not without some hesitation, for I was afraid lest it should be considered discourteous for an inexperienced man, returned home after a long exile, to enter his protest against established practices. But no one seemed to misunderstand my insistence on replying in Gujarati. In fact, I was glad to note that everyone seemed reconciled to my protest. The meeting thus emboldened me to think that I should not find it difficult to place my newfangled notions before my countrymen. After a brief stay in Bombay, full of these preliminary experiences, I went to Pune whither Gokhale had summoned me. Chapter 126. With Gokhale in Pune. The moment I reached Bombay, Gokhale sent me word that the governor was desirous of seeing me, and that it might be proper for me to respond before I left for Pune. Accordingly I called on His Excellency. After the usual inquiries, he said, "I ask one thing of you. I would like you to come and see me whenever you propose to take any steps concerning government." I replied, "I can very easily give the promise, inasmuch as it is my rule, as a Satyagrahi, to understand the viewpoint of the party I propose to deal with, and to try to agree with him as far as may be possible. I strictly observe the rule in South Africa, and I mean to do the same here." Lord Willingdon thanked me and said, "You may come to me whenever you like, and you will see that my government do not willfully do anything wrong." To which I replied, "It is that faith which sustains me." After this I went to Pune. It is impossible for me to set down all the reminiscences of this precious time. Gokhale and the members of the Servants of India Society overwhelmed me with affection. So far as I recollect, Gokhale had summoned all of them to meet me. I had a frank talk with them all on every sort of subject. Gokhale was very keen that I should join the society, and so was I. But the members felt that, as there was a great difference between my ideals and methods of work and theirs, it might not be proper for me to join the society. Gokhale believed that, in spite of my insistence on my own principles, I was equally ready and able to tolerate theirs. "But," he said, "the members of the society have not yet understood your readiness for compromise. They are tenacious of their principles, and quite independent. I am hoping that they will accept you, but if they don't, you will not for a moment think that they are lacking in respect or love for you. They are hesitating to take any risk lest their high regard for you should be jeopardized. But whether you are formally admitted as a member or not, I am going to look upon you as one." I informed Gokhale of my intentions. Whether I was admitted as a member or not, I wanted to have an ashram where I could settle down with my Phoenix family, preferably somewhere in Gujarat, as, being a Gujarati, I thought I was best fitted to serve the country through serving Gujarat. Gokhale liked the idea. He said, "You should certainly do so. Whatever may be the result of your talks with the members, you must look to me for the expenses of the ashram, which I will regard as my own." My heart overflowed with joy. It was a pleasure to feel free from the responsibility of raising funds, and to realize that I should not be obliged to set about the work all on my own, but that I should be able to count on a sure guide whenever I was in difficulty. This took a great load off my mind. So the late Dr. Dev was summoned and told to open an account for me in the Society's books, and to give me whatever I might require for the ashram and for public expenses. I now prepared to go to Shantiniketan. On the eve of my departure, Gokhale arranged a party of selected friends, taking good care to order refreshments of my liking, i.e., fruits and nuts. The party was held just a few paces from his room, and yet he was hardly in a condition to walk across unattended. But his affection for me got the better of him, and he insisted on coming. He came, but fainted, and had to be carried away. Such fainting was not a new thing with him, and so, when he came to, he sent word that we must go on with the party. This party was of course no more than a conversazione in the open space opposite the Society's guest house, during which friends had heart-to-heart chats over light refreshments of groundnuts, dates and fresh fruits of the season. But the fainting fit was to be no common event in my life. Chapter 127. Was it a threat? From Pune I went to Rajkot and Porbandar, where I had to meet my brother's widow and other relatives. During the Satyagraha in South Africa I had altered my style of dress so as to make it more in keeping with that of the indentured laborers, and in England also I had adhered to the same style for indoor use. For landing in Bombay I had a Kathiawadi suit of clothes consisting of a shirt, a dhoti, a cloak and a white scarf, all made of Indian mill cloth. But as I was to travel third from Bombay, I regarded the scarf and the cloak as too much of an encumbrance, so I shed them, and invested in an 8 to 10 annas Kashmiri cap. One dressed in that fashion was sure to pass muster as a poor man. On account of the plague prevailing at that time, third-class passengers were being medically inspected at Varungam or Wadhwan, I forget which. I had slight fever. The inspector, on finding that I had a temperature, asked me to report myself to the medical officer at Rajkot and noted down my name. Someone had perhaps sent the information that I was passing through Wadhwan, for the tailor Motilal, a noted public worker of the place, met me at the station. He told me about the Varungam customs, and the hardships railway passengers had to suffer on account of it. I had little inclination to talk bakayus of my fever, and tried to finish with a brief reply which took the form of a question. Are you prepared to go to jail? I had taken Motilal to be one of those impetuous youths who do not think before speaking. But not so Motilal. He replied with firm deliberation. We will certainly go to jail, provided you lead us. As Kathiawadis, we have the first right on you. Of course we do not mean to detain you now, but you must promise to halt here on your return. You will be delighted to see the work and the spirit of our youths, and you may trust us to respond as soon as you summon us. Motilal captivated me. His comrade, eulogizing him, said, Our friend is but a tailor. But he is such a master of his profession that he easily earns 15 rupees a month, which is just what he needs, working an hour a day, and gives the rest of his time to public work. He leads us all, putting our education to shame. Later I came in close contact with Motilal, and I saw that there was no exaggeration in the eulogy. He made a point of spending some days in the then newly started ashram every month to teach the children tailoring and to do some of the tailoring of the ashram himself. He would talk to me every day of Varungam and the hardships of the passengers, which had become absolutely unbearable for him. He was cut off in the prime of youth by a sudden illness, and public life at Wadhwan suffered without him. On reaching Rajkot, I reported myself to the medical officer the next morning. I was not unknown there. The doctor felt ashamed and was angry with the inspector. This was unnecessary, for the inspector had only done his duty. He did not know me, and even if he had known me, he should done have otherwise. The medical officer would not let me go to him again, insisted on sending an inspector to me instead. Inspection of third-class passage for sanitary reasons is essential on such occasions. If big men choose to travel third, whatever their position in life, they must voluntarily submit themselves to all the regulations that the poor are subject to, and the officials ought to be impartial. My experience is that the officials, instead of looking upon third-class passengers as fellow men, regard them as so many sheep. They talk to them contemptuously, and brook no reply or argument. The third-class passenger has to obey the official as though he were his servant, and the latter may with impunity belabor and blackmail him, and book him his ticket, only putting him to the greatest possible inconvenience, including often missing the train. All this I have seen with my own eyes. No reform is possible unless some of the educated and the rich voluntarily accept the status of the poor, travel third, refuse to enjoy the amenities denied to the poor, and, instead of taking avoidable hardships, discourtesies and injustice as a matter of course, fight for their removal. Wherever I went in Kathiawad I heard complaints about the Varungam customs hardships. I, therefore, decided immediately to make use of Lord Willingdon's offer. I collected and read all the literature available on the subject, convinced myself that the complaints were well-founded, and opened correspondence with the Bombay government. I called on the private secretary to Lord Willingdon and waited on His Excellency also. The latter expressed his sympathy but shifted the blame on Delhi. If it had been in our hands, we should have removed the cordon long ago. You should approach the government of India, said the secretary. I communicated with the government of India, but got no reply beyond an acknowledgement. It was only when I had an occasion to meet Lord Chelmsford later that redress could be had. When I placed the facts before him, he expressed his astonishment. He had known nothing of the matter. He gave me a patient hearing, telephoned that very moment for papers about Varungam, and promised to remove the cordon if the authorities had no explanation or defense to offer. Within a few days of this interview I read in the papers that the Virungam customs cordon had been removed. I regarded this event as the advent of satyagraha in India. For during my interview with the Bombay government the secretary had expressed his disapproval of a reference to satyagraha in a speech which I had delivered in Bagasra, in Kathiawad. Is not this a threat, he had asked. And do you think a powerful government will yield to threats? This was no threat, I had replied. It was educating the people. It is my duty to place before the people all the legitimate remedies for grievances. A nation that wants to come into its own ought to know all the ways and means to freedom. Usually they include violence as the last remedy. Satyagraha, on the other hand, is an absolutely non-violent weapon. I regard it as my duty to explain its practice and its limitations. I have no doubt that the British government is a powerful government, but I have no doubt also that satyagraha is a sovereign remedy. The clever secretary skeptically nodded his head and said, "We shall see." Chapter 128. Shantiniketan. From Rajkot I proceeded to Shantiniketan. The teachers and students overwhelmed me with affection. The reception was a beautiful combination of simplicity, art, and love. It was here I met Kakasaheb Kalelkar for the first time. I did not know then why Kalelkar was called Kakasaheb. But I learnt later on that Sjt Keshvarov Deshpande, who was a contemporary and a close friend of mine in England, and who had conducted a school in the Baroda state called Ganganath Vidyalaya, had given the teachers family names with a view to investing the Vidyalaya with a family atmosphere. Sjt Kalelkar, who was a teacher there, came to be called Kaka, lit. Paternal uncle. Fodka was called Mama, lit. Maternal uncle, and Harihar Sharma received the name Anna, lit. Brother. Others also got similar names. Anand Swami, as Kaka's friend, and Patwardhan, Appa, as Mama's friend. Later joined the family, and all in course of time became my co-workers one after another. Sjt Deshpande himself used to be called Saheb. When the Vidyalaya had to be dissolved, the family also broke up, but they never gave up their spiritual relationship or their assumed names. Kakasaheb went out to gain experience of different institutions, and at the time I went to Shantiniketan, he happened to be there. Chintaman Shastri, belonging to the same fraternity, was there also. Both helped in teaching Sanskrit. The Phoenix family had been assigned separate quarters at Shantiniketan. Mahatma Gandhi was at their head, and he had made it his business to see that all the rules of the Phoenix ashram should be scrupulously observed. I saw that, by dint his fragrance felt in the whole of Shantiniketan. Andrews was there, and also Pearson. Amongst the Bengali teachers with whom we came in fairly close contact were Jagadanand Babu, Nepal Babu, Santosh Babu, Kshitamohan Babu, Najan Babu, Sharad Babu, and Kala Babu. As is my wont, I quickly mixed with the teachers and students, and engaged them in a discussion on self-help. I put it to the teachers that, if they and the boys dispensed with the services of paid cooks and cooked their food themselves, it would enable the teachers to control the kitchen from the point of view of the boys' physical and moral health, and it would afford to the students an object lesson in self-help. One or two of them were inclined to shake their heads. Some of them strongly approved of the proposal. The boys welcomed it, if only because of their instinctive taste for novelty. So we launched the experiment. When I invited the poet to express his opinion, he said that he did not mind it provided the teachers were favorable. To the boys he said, "The experiment contains the key to Swaraj." Pearson began to wear away his body in making the experiment a success. He threw himself into it with zest. A batch was formed to cut vegetables, another to clean the grain, and so on. Najan Babu and others undertook to see to the sanitary cleaning of the kitchen and its surroundings. It was a delight to me to see them working spade in hand. But it was too much to expect the 125 boys with their teachers to take to this work of physical labor like ducks to water. There used to be daily discussion. Some began early to show fatigue. But Pearson was not the man to be tired. One would always find him with his smiling face doing something or other in or about the kitchen. He had taken upon himself the cleaning of the bigger utensils. A party of students played on their sitar before this cleaning party, in order to beguile the tedium of the operation. All alike took the thing up with zest, and Shantiniketan became a busy hive. Changes like these when once begun always develop. Not only was the Phoenix party's kitchen self-conducted, but the food cooked in it was of the simplest. Condiments were eschewed. Rice, dal, vegetables and even wheat flour were all cooked at one and the same time in a kitchen with a view to introducing reform in the Bengali kitchen. One or two teachers and some students ran this kitchen. The experiment was, however, dropped after some time. I am opinion that the famous institution lost nothing by having conducted the experiment for a brief interval, and some of the experiences gained could not but be of help to the teachers. I had intended to stay at Shantiniketan for some time, but fate willed otherwise. I had hardly been there a week when I received from Pune a telegram announcing Gokhale's death. Shantiniketan was immersed in grief. All the members came over to me to express their condolences. A special meeting was called in the ashram temple to mourn the national loss. It was a solemn function. The same day I left for Pune with my wife and Maganlal. All the rest stayed at Shantiniketan. Andrews accompanied me up to Burdwan. Do you think, he asked me, that a time will come for satyagraha in India? And if so, have you any idea when it will come? It is difficult to say, said I. For 1 year I am to do nothing. For Gokhale took from me a promise that I should travel in India for gaining experience, and express no opinion on public question until I have finished the period of probation. Even after the year is over, I will be in no hurry to speak and pronounce opinions. And so I do not suppose there will be any occasion for satyagraha for 5 years or so. I may note in this connection that Gokhale used to laugh at some of my ideas in Hind Swaraj or Indian Home Rule and say, after you have stayed a year in India, your views will correct themselves. Chapter 129. Woes of Third-Class Passengers. At Burdwan we came face to face with the hardships that a third-class passenger has to go through even in securing his ticket. Third-class tickets are not booked so early, we were told. I went to the station master, though that too was a difficult business. Someone kindly directed me to where he was, and I represented to him our difficulty. He also made the same reply. As soon as the booking window opened, I went to purchase the tickets. But it was no easy thing to get them. Might was right, and passengers, who were forward and indifferent to others, coming one after another, continued to push me out. I was therefore about the last of the first crowd to get a ticket. The train arrived, and getting into it was another trial. There was a free exchange of abuse and pushes between passengers already in the train and those trying to get in. We ran up and down the platform, but were everywhere met with the same reply, no room here. I went to the guard. He said, you must try to get in where you can or take the next train. But I have urgent business, I respectfully replied. He had no time to listen to me. I was disconcerted. I told Maganlal to get in wherever possible, and I got into an interclass compartment with my wife. The guard saw us getting in. At a Sansal station he came to charge us excess fares. I said to him, it was your duty to find us room. We could not get any, and so we are sitting here. If you can accommodate us in a third-class compartment, we shall be only too glad to go there. You may not argue with me, said the guard. I cannot accommodate you. You must pay the excess fare, or get out. I wanted to reach Pune somehow. I was not therefore prepared to fight the guard. So I paid the excess fare he demanded, i.e., up to Pune. But I resented the injustice. In the morning we reached Mogalsarai. Maganlal had managed to get a seat in the third class, too, which I now and asked him to give me a certificate to the effect that I had shifted to a third-class compartment at Mogalsarai. This he declined to do. I applied to the railway authorities for redress, and got a reply to this effect. It is not our practice to refund excess fares without the production of a certificate, but we make an exception in your case. It is not possible, however, to refund the excess fare from Burdwan to Mogalsarai. Since this I have had experiences of third-class traveling which, if I wrote them all down, would easily fill a volume. But I can only touch on them causally in these chapters. It has been and always will be my profound regret that physical incapacity should have compelled me to give up third-class traveling. The woes of third-class passengers are undoubtedly due to the high-handedness of railway authorities. But the rudeness, dirty habits, selfishness, and ignorance of the passengers themselves are no less to blame. The pity is that they often do not realize that they are behaving ill, dirtily, or selfishly. They believe that everything they do is in the natural way. All this may be traced to the indifference towards them of us, educated people. We reached Kalyan dead tried. Maganlal and I got some water from the station water pipe and had our bath. As I was proceeding to arrange for my wife's bath, SJT call of the servants of India Society recognizing us came up. He too was going to Pune. He offered to take my wife to the second-class bathroom. I hesitated to accept the courteous offer. I knew that my wife had no right to avail herself of the second-class bathroom, but I ultimately connived at the impropriety. This, I know, does not become a votary of truth. Not that my wife was eager to use the bathroom. But a husband's partiality for his wife got the better of his partiality for truth. The face of truth is hidden behind the golden veil of #Maya says the Upanishad. Chapter 130. Wooing. On arrival in Pune, we found ourselves, after the performance of the #Shraddha ceremonies, discussing the future of the society, and the question as to whether I should join it or not. This question of membership proved a very delicate matter for me to handle. List Gokhale was there. I did not have to seek admission as a member. I had simply to obey his wish, a position I loved to be in. Launching on the stormy sea of Indian public life, I was in need of a sure pilot. I had one in Gokhale and had felt secure in his keeping. Now that he was gone, I was thrown on my own resources, and I felt that it was my duty to seek admission. That, I thought, would please Gokhale's spirit. So, without hesitation and with firmness, I began the wooing. Most of the members of the society were in Pune at this juncture. I set about pleading with them, and tried to dispel their fears about me. But I saw that they were divided. One section favored my admission, the other was strongly against it. I knew that neither yielded to the other in its affection for me, but possibly their loyalty to the society was greater, at any rate not less than their love for me. All our discussions were therefore free from bitterness, and strictly confined to matters of principle. The section that was opposed to me held that they and I were as the poles asunder in various vital matters, and they felt my membership was likely to imperil the very objects for which the society was founded. This naturally was more than they could bear. We dispersed after prolonged discussions, the final decision being postponed to a later date. I was considerably agitated as I returned home. Was it right for me to be admitted by a majority vote? Would it be consonant with my loyalty to Gokhale? I saw clearly that, when there was such a sharp division amongst the members of the society over admitting me, by far the best course for me was to withdraw my application for admission and save those opposed to me from a delicate situation. Therein I thought lay my loyalty to the society and Gokhale. The decision came to me in a flash, and immediately I wrote to Mr. Shastri asking him not to have the adjourned meeting at all. Those who had opposed my application fully appreciated the decision. It saved them from an awkward position and bound us in closer bonds of friendship. The withdrawal of my application made me truly a member of the society. Experience now tell me that it was well that I did not formally become a member, and that the opposition of those who had been against me was justified. Experience has shown too that our views on matters of principle were widely divergent. But the recognition of the differences has meant to estrangement or bitterness between us. We have remained as brothers, and the Society's Pune home has always been for me a place of pilgrimage. It is true that I did not officially become a member of the society, but I have ever been a member. In spirit. Spiritual relationship is far more precious than physical relationship divorced from. Spiritual is body without soul. Chapter 131. Kumbh Mela. I next went to Rangoon to meet Dr. Mehta, and on my way I halted at Calcutta. I was the guest of the late Babu Bhupendranath Basu. Bengali hospitality reached its climax here. In those days I was a strict fruitarian, so all the fruits and nuts available in Calcutta were ordered for me. The ladies of the house kept awake all night skinning various nuts. Every possible care was taken in dressing fresh fruit in the Indian style. Numerous delicacies were prepared for my companions, amongst whom was my son Ramdas. Much as I could appreciate this affectionate hospitality, I could not bear the thought of a whole household being occupied in entertaining 2 or 3 guests. But as yet I saw no escape from such embarrassing attentions. On the boat going to Rangoon I was a deck passenger. If excess of attention embarrassed us in SJT Basu's house, grossest in attention, even to the elementary comforts of deck passengers, was our lot on the boat. What was an apology for a bathroom was unbearably dirty, the latrines were stinking sinks. To use the latrine one had to wade through urine and excreta or jump over them. This was more than flesh and blood could bear. I approached the chief officer without avail. If anything was lacking to complete the picture of stink and filth, the passengers furnished it by their thoughtless habits. They spat where they sat, dirted the surroundings with the leavings of their food, tobacco and betel leaves. There was no end to the noise, and everyone tried to monopolize as much room as possible. Their luggage took up more room than they. We had thus 2 days of the severest trial. On reaching Rangoon I wrote to the agent of the steamship company, acquainting him with all the facts. Thanks to this letter and to Dr. Mehta's efforts in the matter, the return journey though on deck was less unbearable. In Rangoon my fruitarian diet was again a source of additional trouble to the host. But since Dr. Mehta's home was as good as my own, I could control somewhat the lavishness of the menu. However, as I had not set any limit to the number of articles I might eat, the palate and the eyes refused to put an effective check on the supply of varieties ordered. There were no regular hours for meals. Personally, I preferred having the last meal before nightfall. Nevertheless, as a rule it could not be had before 8 or 9. This year 1915 was the year of the Kumbh Fair, which is held at Hardwar once every 12 years. I was by no means eager to attend the fair, but I was anxious to meet Mahatma Gandhi, who was in his Gurukul. Gokhale's society had sent a big volunteer corps for service at the Kumbh. Pandit Hridayanath Kundru was at the head, and the late Dr. Dev was the medical officer. I was invited to send the Phoenix party to assist them, and so Mahatma Gandhi had already preceded me. On my return from Rangoon, I joined the band. The journey from Calcutta to Hardwar was particularly trying. Sometimes the compartments had no lights. From Saharanpur we were huddled into carriages for goods or cattle. These had no roofs, and what with the blazing midday sun overhead and the scorching iron floor beneath, we were all but roasted. The pangs of thirst, caused by even such a journey as this, could not persuade Orthodox Hindus to take water, if it was Musalmani. They waited until they could get the Hindu water. These very Hindus, let it be noted, do not so much as hesitate or inquire when, during illness, the doctor administers them wine or prescribes beef tea, or a Musalman or Christian compounder gives them water. Our stay in Shantiniketan had taught us that the scavenger's work would be our special function. In India. Now for the volunteers in Hardwar tents had been pitched in a #Dharmashala hashtag, and Dr. Dev had dug some pits to be used as latrines. He had to depend on paid scavengers for looking after these. Here was work for the Phoenix party. We offered to cover up the excreta with earth and to see to their disposal, and Dr. Dev gladly accepted our offer. The offer was naturally made by me, but it was Mahatma Gandhi who had to execute it. My business was mostly to keep sitting in the tent giving #Darshan hashtag and holding religious and other discussions with numerous pilgrims who called on me. This left me not a minute which I could call my own. I was followed even to the bathing got hashtag by these #Darshan seekers nor did they leave me alone whilst I was having my meals. Thus it was in Hardwar that I realized what a deep impression my humble services in South Africa had made throughout the whole of India. But this was no enviable position to be in. I felt as though I was between the devil and the deep sea. Where no one recognized me, I had to put up with the hardships that fall to the lot of the millions in this land, e.g., in railway traveling. Where I was surrounded by people who had heard of me, I was the victim of their craze for #Darshan hashtag. Which of the two conditions was more pitiable? I have often been at a loss to determine. That at least I know that the #Darshan Vala's #blind love has often made me angry, and more often sore at heart. Whereas traveling, though often trying, has been uplifting and has hardly ever roused me to anger. I was in those days strong enough to roam about a lot, and was fortunately not so known as not to be able to go in the streets without creating much fuss. During these roamings I came to observe more of the pilgrims' absent-mindedness, hypocrisy and slovenliness, than of their piety. The swarm of sadhus, who had descended there, seemed to have been born but to enjoy the good things of life. Here I saw a cow with 5 feet. I was astonished, but knowing men soon disillusioned me. The poor 5-footed cow was a sacrifice to the greed of the wicked. I learnt that the 5th foot was nothing else but a foot cut off from a live calf and grafted upon the shoulder of the cow. The result of this double cruelty was exploited to fleece the ignorant of their money. There was no Hindu but would be attracted by a 5-footed cow, and no Hindu but would lavish his charity on such a miraculous cow. The day of the fair was now upon us. It proved a red-letter day for me. I had not gone to Hardwar with the sentiments of a pilgrim. I have never thought of frequenting places of pilgrimage in search of piety. But the 17 lakhs of men that were reported to be there could not all be hypocrites or mere sightseers. I had no doubt that countless people amongst them had gone there to earn merit and for self-purification. It is difficult, if not impossible, to say to what extent this kind of faith uplifts the soul. I therefore passed the whole night immersed in deep thought. There were those pious souls in the midst of the hypocrisy that surrounded them. They would be free of guilt before their Maker. If the visit to Hardwar was in itself a sin, I must publicly protest against it, and leave Hardwar on the day Kumbh. If the pilgrimage to Hardwar and to the Kumbh fair was not sinful, I must impose Some act of self-denial on myself in atonement for the iniquity prevailing there and purify myself. This was quite natural for me. My life is based on disciplinary resolutions. I thought of the unnecessary trouble I had caused to my hosts at Calcutta and Rangoon, who had so lavishly entertained me. I therefore decided to limit the articles of my daily diet and to have my final meal before sunset. I was convinced that, if I did not impose these restrictions on myself, I should put my future hosts to considerable inconvenience and should engage them in serving me rather than engage myself in service. So I pledged myself never whilst in India to take more than 5 articles in 24 hours, and never to eat after dark. I gave the fullest thought to the difficulties I might have to face. But I wanted to leave no loophole. I rehearsed to myself what would happen during an illness if I counted medicine among the 5 articles, and made no exception in favor of special articles of diet. I finally decided that there should be no exception on any account whatsoever. I have been under these vows for now 13 years. They have subjected me to a severe test, but I am able to testify that they have also served as my shield. I am of opinion that they have added a few years to my life and saved me from many an illness. Chapter 132. Lakshman Jula. It was a positive relief to reach the Gurukul and meet Mahatma Gandhi with his giant frame. I at once felt the wonderful contrast between the peace of the Gurukul and the din and noise of Hardwar. The Mahatma overwhelmed me with affection. The Brahmacharis were all attention. It was here that I was first introduced to Acharya Ramadevji, and I could immediately see what a force and a power he must be. We had different viewpoints in several matters, nevertheless our acquaintance soon ripened into friendship. I had long discussions with Acharya Ramadevji and other professors about the necessity of introducing industrial training into the Gurukul. When the time came for going away, it was a wrench to leave the place. I had heard much in praise of the Lakshman Jula, a hanging bridge over the Ganges, some distance from Rishikesh, and many friends pressed me not to leave Hardwar without having gone as far as the bridge. I wanted to do this pilgrimage on foot, and so I did it in 2 stages. Many #sannyasis called on me at Rishikesh. One of them was particularly attracted towards me. The Phoenix party was there, and their presence drew from the Swami many questions. We had discussions about religion, and he realized that I felt deeply about matters of religion. He saw me bareheaded and shirtless as I had returned from my bath in the Ganges. He was pained to miss the shikha, tuft of hair, on my head and the sacred thread about my neck, and said, "It pains me to see you, a believing Hindu, going without a sacred thread and the shikha. These are the 2 external symbols of Hinduism, and every Hindu ought to wear them." Now there is a history as to how I came to dispense with both. When I was an urchin of 10, I envied the Brahmin lads sporting bunches of keys tied to their sacred threads, and I wished I could do likewise. The practice of wearing the sacred thread was not then common among the Vaishya families in Kathiawad, but a movement had just been started for making it obligatory for the first 3 Varnas. As a result, several members of the Gandhi clan adopted the sacred thread. The Brahmin who was teaching 2 or 3 of us boys Ram Raksha invested us with the thread, and although I had no occasion to possess a bunch of keys, I got one and began to sport it. Later, when the thread gave way, I do not remember whether I missed it very much, but I know that I did not go in for a fresh one. As I grew up, several well-meaning attempts were made both in India and South Africa to reinvest me with the sacred thread, but with little success. If the Shudras may not wear it, I argued, what right have the other Varnas to do so? And I saw no adequate reason for adopting what was to me an unnecessary custom. I had no objection to the thread as such, but the reasons for wearing it were lacking. As a Vaishnava, I had naturally worn round my neck the kanthi, and the shikha was considered obligatory by letters. On the eve of my going to England, however, I got rid of the shikha, lest when I was bareheaded it should expose me to ridicule and make me look, as I then thought, a barbarian in the eyes of the Englishman. In fact, this cowardly feeling carried me so far that in South Africa I got my cousin Shaganlal Gandhi, who was religiously wearing the shikha, to do away with it. I feared that it might come in the way of his public work, and so, even at the risk of paining him, I made him get rid of it. I therefore made a clean breast of the whole matter to the Swami and said, "I will not wear the sacred thread, for I see no necessity for it, when countless Hindus can go without it and yet remain Hindus. Moreover, the sacred thread should be a symbol of spiritual regeneration, presupposing a deliberate attempt on the part of the wearer at a higher and purer life. I doubt whether in the present state of Hinduism and of India, Hindus can vindicate the right can come only after Hinduism has purged itself of untouchability, has removed all distinctions of superiority and inferiority, and shed a host of other evils and shams that have become rampant in it. My mind therefore rebels against the idea of wearing the sacred thread. But I am sure your suggestion about the hashtag Shikha hashtag is worth considering. I once used to have it, and I discarded it from a false sense of shame. And so I feel that I should start growing it again. I shall discuss the matter with my comrades. The Swami did not appreciate my position with regard to the sacred thread. The very reasons that seemed to me to point to not wearing it appeared to him to favor its wearing. Even today my position remains about the same as it was for Rishikesh. So long as there are different religions, every one of them may need some outward distinctive symbol. But when the symbol is made into a fetish and an instrument of proving the superiority of one's religion over others, it is fit only to be discarded. The sacred thread does not appear to me today to be a means of uplifting Hinduism. I am therefore indifferent to it. As for the Shikha, cowardice having been the reason for discarding it, after consultation with friends I decided to regrow it. But to return to Lakshman Jula. I was charmed with the natural scenery about Rishikesh and the Lakshman Jula, and bowed my head in reverence to our ancestors for their sense of the beautiful in nature, and for their foresight in investing beautiful manifestations of nature with a religious significance. But the way in which men were using these beauty spots was far from giving me peace. As at Hardwar, so at Rishikesh, people dirt the roads and the fair banks of the Ganges. They did not even hesitate to desecrate the sacred water of the Ganges. It filled me with agony to see people performing natural functions on the thoroughfares and river banks, when they could easily have gone a little farther away from public haunts. Lakshman Jula was, I saw, nothing but an iron suspension bridge over the Ganges. I was told that originally there had been a fine rope bridge. But a philanthropic Marwadi got it into his head to destroy the rope bridge and erect an iron one at a heavy cost, and then entrusted the keys to the government. I am at a loss to say anything about the rope bridge as I have never seen it, but the iron bridge is entirely out of place in such surroundings and mars their beauty. The making over of the keys of this pilgrim's bridge to government was too much even for my loyalty of those days. The Svargashram which one reaches after crossing the bridge was a wretched place, being nothing but a number of shabby-looking sheds of galvanized iron sheets. These, I was told, were made for sadakas, aspirants. There were hardly any living there at the moment. Those who were in the main building gave one an unfavorable impression. But the Hardwar experiences proved for me to be of inestimable value. They helped me in no small way to decide where I was to live and what I was to do. Chapter 133. Founding of the Ashram. The pilgrimage to the Kumbh fair was my second visit to Hardwar. The Satyagraha Ashram was founded on the 25th of May, 1915. Shardhananji wanted me to settle in Hardwar. Some of my Calcutta friends recommended Vaidyanathadam. Others strongly urged me to choose Rajkot. But when I happened to pass through Ahmedabad, many friends pressed me to settle down there, and they volunteered to find the expenses of the ashram, as well as a house for us to live in. I had a predilection for Ahmedabad. Being a Gujarati, I thought I should be able to render the greatest service to the country through the Gujarati language. And then, as Ahmedabad was an ancient center of handloom weaving, it was likely to be the most favorable field for the revival of the cottage industry of hand spinning. There was also the hope that, the city being the capital of Gujarat, monetary help from its wealthy citizens would be more available here than elsewhere. The question of untouchability was naturally among the subjects discussed with the Ahmedabad friends. I made it clear to them that I should take the first opportunity of admitting an untouchable candidate to the ashram if he was otherwise worthy. "Where is the untouchable who satisfy your condition?" said a Vaishnava friend self-complacently. I finally decided to found the ashram at Ahmedabad. So far as accommodation was concerned, SJT Jivanlal Desai, a barrister in Ahmedabad, was the principal man to help me. He offered to let, and we decided to hire, his Kakrab bungalow. The first thing we had to settle was the name of the ashram. I consulted friends. Amongst the names suggested were Savashram, the abode of service, Tapovan, the abode of austerities, etc. I liked the name Savashram, but for the absence of emphasis on the method of service. Tapovan seemed to be a pretentious title, because though tapas was dear to us, we would not presume to be tapasvans, men of austerity. Our creed was devotion to truth, and our business was the search for and insistence on truth. I wanted to acquaint India with the method I had tried in South Africa, and I desired to test in India the extent to which its application might be possible. So my companions and I selected the name Satyagraha Ashram as conveying both goal and our method of service. For the conduct of the ashram, a code of rules and observances was necessary. A draft was therefore prepared, and friends were invited to express their opinions on it. Amongst the many opinions that were received, that of Sir Gurudas Banerjee is still in my memory. He liked the rules, but suggested that humility should be added as one of the observances, as he believed that the younger generation sadly lacked humility. Though I noticed this fault, I feared humility would cease to be humility the moment it became a matter of vow. The true connotation of humility is self-effacement. Self-effacement is moksha, salvation, and whilst it cannot, by itself, be an observance, there may be other observances necessary for its attainment. If the acts of an aspirant after moksha or a servant have no humility or selflessness about them, there is no longing for moksha or service. Service without humility is selfishness and egotism. There were at this time about 13 Tamilians in our party. 5 Tamil youngsters had accompanied me from South Africa, and the rest came from different parts of the country. We were in all about 25 men and women. This is how the ashram started. All had their meals in a common kitchen and strove to live as one family.